we as the Enterprise Center are here to help small businesses get started, and we also work with existing small businesses to help with resources and information and guidance. We have all kinds of webinars each month, and invite you to stay in touch with for webinars or for one-to-one conversations if you need some help or guidance. So I'd like to introduce Julie, and Julie brings 30 years of experience as a mental health worker, public speaker, educator, spoken all over the world. I remember the first time I saw her speaking, I was working at in a different career, in a different workplace, and she really left it really resonated with me, and she really cares about the people she deals with. That's something I really came away from that. Julie is right here in Niagara, in St. Catharines, specializing in anger and trauma recovery, forensic psychology, relationships, and bullying. And I've known her to speak on topics related to conflict and anger and mental health and your faith as well, Julie, and personal growth. And I'll just leave it at I've noticed you've been branded as Oprah for The Office, and I've also known you as the Anger Lady. Some of your clients have called you. And that's because your passion really comes across. And I really want to turn it over to you to correct anything I might have, or add anything I might have missed. And I'm really grateful that you volunteered your time to come on. It's something we've all felt is radical change over the past few months. And in talking with small business owners, I've been hearing a degree of anxiety come across, and so I asked Julie. Julie and I agreed that she would come on and have a talk. So Julie, welcome, and thank you so much for doing this for us.
Thanks so much for having me, Rob. It's a pleasure. Like Rob said, we've known each other for a really long time, about 20 years.
Right.
And yeah, it is, I guess, really humbling to have the opportunity to speak to other business owners about something that, you know, is I think it's near and dear to my heart, but something that's really, really important as we move forward in these really unprecedented and very unpredictable times, right? So Rob has asked me to talk about mental health, mental health and wellness, stress management, dealing with fear and anxiety during these turbulent times. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm not going to add anything to my bio because you already knew I wasn't going to do that. And I'm just going to share the screen with you. And so we're going to be talking about dealing with fear and anxiety, specifically as it relates to those of us who are in business. And Rob alluded to it. I've been in business in Niagara. Actually started my business the year before we decided to move to Niagara, which was a little bit daunting because I had started my company in 1997. We moved to Niagara in 1998, and I didn't know anyone here and had to start over from scratch and build a whole new customer base and those sorts of things. Those were very uncertain times for us as a couple and as a family, for sure. And my husband started a new career, back to school, started a new career in 1998. I started a brand new career in 1999, working as a public speaker. Up until that time, I had worked in residential homes with people with mental illness and brain injury. And so switching over from that to going on the road as a public speaker full-time, there were lots of opportunities to feel really terrified, to be really scared. And so I think in those early days, I learned how to manage my thought process because that was really important. But moving forward, you know, as we come up now, opening a psychotherapy practice back in 2012 and building another business, I was telling Rob yesterday that I really wanted to build something that was recession proof because, you know, in the last 20 some years that I've been working on my own, I have seen the economy rise and fall and then rise and fall again. And I thought, you know what, I need something that I can rest assured that no matter what's going on in the world, somehow our business can stay open. And so I hope that I can share some of those tips with you as we go along. And the very first thing I want to talk about is what I had mentioned before, is what happens when fear and anxiety actually shows up. And most fear is, well, I should say anxiety is fear driven, and fear is driven by the direction of our thoughts. And so when I was thinking this out over the last few years, I came up with what I call a thought matrix. And if we start at the top with the yellow arrow, what you'll see is that your thoughts inform your feelings. And so if you're thinking negative thoughts, they're going to take your feelings in a certain direction, and those feelings will then inform the choices and the actions that you take. Because what human beings tend to do more often than not is that when we have an anxious thought, and then that's accompanied by an anxious feeling, our instinct, our initial response is to try and fix that feeling. And so what happens is that if we think the wrong way, if I can put it that way, then our feelings get activated, and we have these feelings of anxiety, frustration, fear, disappointment, sadness, whatever those might be. We don't like the way that that feels. And so when you don't like something, you want to fix it. That's just, like I say, it's human nature. And so what we do then is we sort of short circuit. Instead of running full circle, we'll cut across from how I feel, and then I'll choose to go back and try to fix that feeling. And then we get stuck in this loop, because when you're trying to fix the feeling, you're not really focused on the desired outcome. And while you're busy over here fixing feelings, your outcome is getting further and further away. And so what's really important then is to think first about your desired outcome. And when you're thinking about your outcomes, your thoughts will shift, therefore your feelings will shift, and it will empower you to make better choices and take better actions, or more conscious actions, so that they get you closer to the outcome that you want. So I'll give you an example. So when I first started doing this webinar, I've been doing several of them with different corporations since the end of March. And the issue back then was, what if I get laid off? What if somebody in my household gets sick? What if somebody I love dies of COVID and I can't go and see them and we can't have a funeral? What if I don't have enough money to pay the rent at the end of the month, right? All of those kinds of questions. And those thoughts create anxiety. They're anxiety generating. You're thinking about, what if I don't have enough money? And then of course your brain answers that question by saying, if you don't have enough money to pay the rent, you might get evicted after a couple of months, because, and then you think, well, where are we going to live? It's COVID, it's a quarantine, and nobody, and so we just start to panic. And when that panic takes over, all you want to do is make the panic go away. You're not thinking about your desired outcome, which is to ensure you have enough income to pay your bills, or to get the personal protective equipment that you need, gloves, hand sanitizer, whatever, to make sure that you and your family are protected. You're not thinking about how you could negotiate with your landlord or with your bank to defer payments. You're not thinking about any of those things, because all you're thinking is, I'm panicked and I don't like feeling panicked. I need to fix the panic, right? And so if we can think ahead, and when we ask those questions, what if this happens? Then we need to look at, what is it that I want, right? Rather than, how do I get this awful feeling to go away? And so really fighting this issue of fear and anxiety starts on the battlefield of your mind, right? And it ends actually in the battlefield of your mind, because if you can manage your thoughts, if you can direct your thoughts in the right place, then your feelings, your choices, your actions will follow, and your outcomes will be different. Right now, we are in a period of rapid change, and I have this book, and I wish I had it in here in this library. I have about 4 libraries in my house, but not in this library. It's in my bedroom. It's a book called The Shockwave Rider, and one of the things they talk about in this book is this concept called future shock. And future shock is what happens when the times are changing so rapidly that the human being, the human psyche, doesn't have time to catch up. I kind of feel like that's what's happening in the world right now. There's just so much happening. It's happening so fast. Things are changing every day on the fly. I mean, we're getting daily updates on COVID-19. We live in a Twitterverse. We're getting updates all the time. It's really hard to cope with that rapid change. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the cycle of change and how it applies to what's been going on in the world, you know, with current events. And the first thing is that when a change is introduced, so if you look at the left part of your screen, when a change is introduced, the first thing that change is often met with is resistance. Most people will be resistant to change. I think I'm a little bit of a freak in the sense that I welcome change. I get excited when I see things around me changing. That's not sort of a blanket statement, but certainly when I see opportunities arise to further my business, or you know, BlackBerry comes out with a new phone, which apparently will never happen again. You know, I'm one of those early adopters, right? I'm like, okay, let's try this. But for the most part, people tend to be resistant to change. And it's only through self-development and increased confidence and trying things out, right, that we can develop that willingness to risk and experience the change. And eventually what happens is that when we move out of resistance into adopting different aspects of the change, then we become comfortable with it and we can't remember what it was like before the change happened. Now, in terms of COVID-19 and the quarantine, we all remember what it was like before this thing struck. We're not so deep into it. But here's the interesting thing, that as people have adapted to working from home, to homeschooling, and balancing that work-life balance as it has shifted, now the question is that now that the province is looking to reopen, now there's resistance to going back to work. Initially, there was a resistance to going home, right? And now there's a resistance to going back to work. I own a private practice in psychotherapy. I rent an office in Thorold. And I have said several times, I'm not going back to work until I have all of the PPE required, right? So I have masks, which I bought probably a month ago before the announcement ever came. I have buckets of hand sanitizer and cleanser and all those sorts of things. But there are other aspects of our physical space that need to be changed before we can bring clients back in. So I'm not so much resistant as I am in that place of development, right? I'm not willing to risk going back in until I have all of those other areas covered. And you might find that you're in the same place, that your stores are allowed to open now, or your places of business, or your offices, you know, you're being asked to go back to work, and you're worried about that. And I think that kind of concern, I don't want to call it anxiety, but that kind of concern is healthy concern, because it allows you to look at, again, your desired outcomes, to see what you can do in order to get the outcome that you want. And what is the outcome that we want right now? We want to be able to go to work and be safe. We want the people who come through our doors and interact with us to also be safe. We want to keep each other safe. We want to make sure that we can make money, even though the way that we make money is going to be really different than the way it was before. You know, I think of a store like Costco and just the volume of people that would walk through that store in the course of a day. And now they have to social distance people. They can only let so many people into the store per day. It's changing their bottom line. They're going to have to find ways to adapt in order to remain successful, right? And we're going to have to do the same. The joy of being a small business is that, as I said, you know, I said this to Rob yesterday, I've said this several times, that small is fast. You know, big and powerful has its own benefits. But, you know, if you have an elephant trying to trap a mouse, the odds are the mouse will get away because it's small, it's quick, and it's fast. And the elephant just doesn't have the agility to catch up. So whereas some big corporations have been able to pivot and shift, many of them are still struggling to catch up with the change. They're experiencing future shock. But because we are small businesses, we have that advantage that we can pivot quickly, we can make changes. And if we make a mistake, so what? We can do something else, right? As long as we've thought it out and really looked at the possibilities. I'm going to give you a tool to do that in a second. But look at everything from all the different angles and have that willingness to risk, we can actually be successful as we go through these processes of change. So I want to share with you a couple of tools that will help you to deal with that anxiety when it does creep up and threaten to sort of overpower your natural thought process. So the first tool is something called cognitive restructuring. And there are different activities that we can do in cognitive restructuring. I'm only sharing one with you. This one is probably one of the simplest ones. It's called putting your thoughts on trial. So the whole idea is, when you get one of those panicked, anxious thoughts like, oh my gosh, we're never going to be able to meet all of our financial responsibilities. What is the evidence that supports that thought? Because if you allow that thought to grow and take root in your mind, what's going to happen is you're going to be so paralyzed, and trust me, I speak from experience in this, you're going to be so paralyzed by fear that you won't be able to take any steps to prevent that what if thing from happening. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so you need to really step back and look at the thought. Okay, so my thought is, and write it down, my thought is that we won't be able to meet our financial responsibilities for the end of the month. Where's the evidence that supports that? Is it that, have you actually looked at your numbers, right? This is something that's being drilled into me all the time by my business advisors. Julie, you've got to know your numbers. Okay, so have you actually looked at your numbers? Have you looked at how things are different from last month to this month, or from 6 months ago to this month? Have you examined ways that you can build business or bring in more revenue? Have you implemented those things? Are you waiting for those implementations to yield results? What is the evidence that refutes your thought? Have you had more people coming in this month than last month? Do you have outstanding invoices that you're just waiting to get paid and you haven't factored that in, right? So you have to look at all of the evidence. Where's the evidence that supports the thought that we won't have enough? Where's the evidence that refutes your thought? Once you reach a final verdict, you can't stay there, right? When people talk about the law of attraction, they often forget another law that is attached to that. And this one was first introduced to me by John Assaraf, and I've never forgotten it. And he calls it the law of Goya, which is get off your ass, right? You can't just come to a final verdict and go, well, this is what has to be done, and just, wait for the universe to give it to you. You actually have to get up, get off your butt, and go and make those things happen. And that's what happens when you can redirect your thoughts, that it takes you and it clarifies for you what steps of action that you should be taking so that you can get to that desired outcome. Your desired outcome is not to go bankrupt at the end of the month. It's not to be in arrears and to go into deeper debt. Whatever, if you're worried about going into debt, it's because you don't want to go there. And so you need to flip it so that you can say, okay, what I really want is I want to have enough so that we can move forward, at least break even, get some sort of a profit. We want to be able to maintain, or we want to be able to grow during this period. Whatever your desired outcome is, once you have examined those anxious thoughts, now you should have clarification as to how you can take action. So this is one of the tools that I have been using for 30 years at the very least. And this is one of the tools that we use in a program that I developed called Anger Solutions, but it applies for everything. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to process through. Remember, I said that this battle will be won here in the mind. So we have to think specific things. We have to ask ourselves specific questions. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what is happening? And so often we just assume that we know, right? We just assume that we know what's happening. We don't actually examine the facts of the case. We don't look at all of the different angles to what is happening. We see something, we interpret it, right? We attach meaning to it, and then we go off about it, right? Excuse me. I see this all the time in social media, right? Somebody posts something, somebody reads it, they don't really read it, they just see a few words that trigger them, and then they go and they blow up, and they leave this long rant, and then everybody else is like, what's wrong with you, man? Did you actually read the post? You know, so we have to be a little bit more conscious when we're examining what's going on around us. So the first question is, what is actually happening here? Step back, take your emotions out of it, and just examine the picture that you see before you. Then the second thing we need to ask is, what does this mean? Because life means nothing until you attach a meaning to it, right? So, you know, I'll give you a silly example that I remember from years ago. My husband and I were at Walmart shopping with our kids. And I think we were shopping for shoes or something. So we had a buggy, it was empty. We were walking towards the shoe department and we stopped to look at something. And while we were stopped and distracted, someone came strolling down the aisle, grabbed the buggy with two hands and just kept on walking. And I was like, you know, and my kids all were looking and my husband went, thief. They're a thief, they're a buggy robber. And he was laughing. He wasn't making a big deal out of it. And we all just cracked up. Why? Because it means nothing, right? It means nothing. Now, if I had an infant and my infant were in that buggy, I'll tell you what, there would have been a riot in the Walmart because my husband and I would have been chasing that person down, knocking them out so that we could get our baby back, right? The meaning you attach to what is happening is going to determine how you feel about it, okay? So first thing, what's happening? Second thing, what does it mean? Now we're asking, how do I feel about it? And it's really important, I think, to name your feelings, to call them out, to say, I'm upset, I'm afraid, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I'm concerned, I'm disappointed. Be very clear about the feeling because you don't want to minimize how you feel because there's going to be something inside of you that just doesn't resonate with that. And you certainly don't want to escalate how you feel because then you'll be overreacting. Okay, so you want to choose your feeling word carefully. The next question you should be asking is, what is my desired outcome? What do I really want? Okay, what do I really want? How do I want this to end up? How would I like this to turn out? However you want to phrase that. What is my desired outcome? And then the next question is, what can I do? What can I do to achieve that outcome? If I sit here biting my nails for a half an hour, I'm going to be self-soothing and I'll fix the feeling of anxiety, but it won't take me any closer to my desired outcome. So what can I do? Can I send out a newsletter offering, I don't know, a special deal? Can I revert to COVID pricing, something that I've done in my practice for students, for the elderly, for people on a fixed income? In our practice, we now have COVID pricing. So we have a special rate for people who would have a more difficult time accessing mental health services. We've lowered our rate to accommodate them throughout the period of quarantine. We also went from providing in-house services to virtual services. We had done that actually prior to the quarantine, but it just turned out that that was a really good decision because now we're fully virtual and we'll continue to offer virtual services. That means that we can expand our practice outside of the Niagara region, right? So if we start looking about what we can do, we may find that there are great advantages to the thing that we once thought was a liability, right? We can start to see ways that you can grow, expand your business. There are several things I'm doing now, both in my private practice as well as through Leverage U, that I never envisioned myself doing because necessity called for it. And when I asked myself, what can I do to get the outcomes I want, the ideas started to come. There are two other questions that are not on this square that I want to introduce before we talk about the last one. So when we ask, what can I do to achieve that outcome? The other two questions you really have to ask are, what are the best thing that can happen if I do this? And what's the worst thing that can happen if I do this? Because the human brain always wants to go to the worst thing. Always. It goes to the worst thing and says, oh, that's terrible. Well, I can't do that, right? But it doesn't answer, what's the best thing that could happen? Right? What's the best thing that could happen if I take a risk in this area? What's the best thing that could happen if I negotiate with my landlord? When I went to my landlord and I approached him with the idea of will you allow us to pay half the rent for the next 3 months? He looked at me and said, don't pay any rent at all. Okay, thank you. Right? Thank you very much. I mean, my landlord is wonderful and I'm so grateful for him. But what would have happened if I had never asked him? Right? If I was too afraid, if I said, no, we don't know him that well and we haven't been in the building that long. And what if he just says, you people are just trying to get out of rent and I'm just going to evict you if you don't have money to pay. If I had gone down that what if the worst happens road and never thought to wonder what would be the best thing that could happen, I might never have gotten that outcome. Do you see what I'm saying? So sometimes we have to weigh it out, both sides. What's the best thing? What's the worst thing that can happen? And then the final question that we need to ask is, what is the lifetime value of this event? I can't stress this enough, you guys. What is the lifetime value of this event? Some things, like quarantine, are going to impact us for the rest of our lives, okay? What's happening right now in terms of civil unrest because of the events that have happened in the United States, those things are going to impact us for the rest of our lives. But there are so many little things that happen in the course of a day and over the course of a week that we get so wound up about. And when you ask yourself, what is the lifetime value of this event? It's nothing. This is why we could laugh at the lady who stole our buggy at Walmart. What's the lifetime value of this event? Absolutely nothing. Who cares? We're shopping for shoes. I'm pretty sure our kids can carry their own shoes, right? We took the buggy as habit, not because it was vital to our shopping experience, right? And sometimes we get so upset, particularly now because we're so bombarded with information, social media, the television, the radio, news constantly, right? We're just bombarded with all of this information. We don't know what's true. We don't know what's real. We don't know if this is fake news. We don't know if there's a political agenda. We don't, like sometimes you just have to ask yourself, what is the lifetime value of this event? Is this important enough for me to invest additional energy into trying to solve this problem, or is this actually no big deal, right? And the way that you would determine whether something has lifetime value or not is looking at the relationships that are attached to that event, okay? I've had people say really horrendous, offensive, disgusting things to me. And after I went through this process and I got to what's the lifetime value of this event, I realized there is no lifetime value of this event, except for the fact that because I used this process that I'm teaching you, now I have something to use as an example when I do webinars and seminars. Now I can use it as a tool. Outside of that, no lifetime value. I don't remember their faces. I don't remember the sound of their voice. I don't remember anything about them because not important, right? And very often we get sidetracked by the urgent and we have to leave off the important. And what asking this question does is it helps to remind you of what's really important so that you can prioritize a little bit better as you problem solve. So another tool I want to share with you, and I hope if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be happy to do a little Q&A as we go forward. I know I'm kind of barreling through this content because I'm conscious of the time.
No,
but
it's great, and there's been a couple comments, so you're doing great. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I want to be able to answer questions as we go.
Perfect.
So with anxious thoughts often come anxious behaviors. And this process came out of a conversation I had with a client who said, I keep notice that when I'm feeling anxious, I start doing these things. I start chewing on my fingernails and biting my cuticles and fidgeting. I'm constantly fidgeting and I don't know how to make myself keep still. And then that's distressing. And because she's distressed by that, then she uses more self-soothing behaviors. So this is how to redirect your thoughts and those behaviors to doing something different. The first thing you need to do is to just direct your awareness to the fact of what you're doing, right? I have a terrible habit of chewing on this side of my lip. And I do it when I'm in deep thought, and I do it when I'm anxious, and I do it sometimes just because I'm watching television and I'm not actually aware of the fact that I'm doing it. And my husband will often, you know, tap my leg or something, and he'll whisper and say, "Stop biting your lip." And then I'll be like, "Oh yeah, okay." So I'm just becoming aware of the fact that I'm doing it, and then acknowledge it. Oh, I'm biting my lip again. Okay. So the next thing that you want to do, and you're doing this in really rapid sequence, is to be accepting of what I'm doing in the moment. So a lot of times my husband will say, "Why are you biting your lip?" I'm like, "I don't know, but it feels good in the moment." And that's why I'm doing it. Because he's checking in. Are you anxious? Are you upset? What's going on? And I'm just like, you know what? I'm not attaching anything to it right now. I'm just accepting the fact that I'm doing it. That's all. No blame, no shame, nothing like that. It's just, oh, I noticed that I'm biting my lip. I see that I'm doing it. I'm okay with the fact that I'm doing it. Because remember, the moment I attach meaning to it, if that meaning is that I'm anxious, then I'm going to start trying to figure out, why am I anxious? And if I'm not actually anxious, then my brain is going to look for a reason for me to be anxious, right? And it's going to reinforce that anxious feeling. So the next part is not, why am I feeling this way, but how am I feeling in this moment? Am I actually anxious? No. Am I nervous? Maybe. Am I bored? Likely. Right? Am I lonely? Nope. Am I sad? Nope. Am I tired? Nope. Right? So just go through, what am I actually feeling right now? How am I feeling? Am I just doing this out of habit? Yeah, that's probably what it is. Okay. But if I am trying to fix a feeling, what could I do instead? Again, what is my desired outcome? Okay, if I'm feeling this way, why am I feeling this way? And what is the opposite, right? If I'm worried about this, what's the opposite of that? How do I get to that thing? So how can I shift my thoughts so that the feeling would change? Because I know if I shift my thoughts and my feelings change, I will stop doing this. Does that make sense? So the next thing that we want to do then, once you've gone through that thought process of what's going on with me, how am I feeling? Is there a reason for why I'm feeling this way? What is it that I actually want? What's my desired outcome? Now what can I do? So it's back to that think frame that I showed you before. This is where I would actively look at, how can I extinguish the old behavior by introducing a healthier choice? So if I'm bored, how about I go find something to do? Right? You know, I don't live in a huge house. It's about 1,100 square feet, but I live with 3 adult males. So there's a lot to do in this house. I'm sure I can find something if I'm really that bored. But there's also paperwork and administration and invoicing and right, there's always something to do. So if I'm not happy in the thing that I'm doing right now, I can shift, I can do something else. Very often, one of the benefits from working from home is that I will just kick my shoes off and I'll go outside and I'll just get grounded for 10 minutes, right? I'll stand out there in my bare feet, let the dog run circles around me, and I'll water the plants or something, but it's just an opportunity for me to get my body grounded. Then I can come back into my office and get back to work. So making that shift is where you always want to go. What's my desired outcome? How do I get there? Oh, I'm feeling this. Why am I feeling this way? What is it that I want? What can I do to get there? That's always the process. So I want to share with you quickly some strategies for reducing anxiety and stress. And if you guys want to follow us on Instagram, this is my practice. Sorry, I have to separate because Leverage You has an Instagram account as well, but you're going to find the strategies at Spa for the Soul. So it's Spa for the Soul, all one word. And that's the name of our private practice. And you go there and you'll see that we've got lots of strategies we've been introducing since March on how to cope with anxiety, stress, depression, etc., you know, throughout COVID.
Was that Spa for the Soul or Spot?
For the Soul. Spa, S-P-A for the Soul. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing that I want to share is stay connected. Because we've been relegated to our houses, And those of us who are still working out of our places of business are doing that, I think, for the most part in isolation. That can be very depressing. And not having the kind of connection that we humans who are pack animals are used to is difficult. But thanks to technology, and we have Zoom, we have Skype, we have WhatsApp, we have MSN Messenger, we have FaceTime, we have all of these things. There are lots of ways for you to stay connected. So it's really important for you to reach out to your friends, your family, your customers, your clients, and to remain connected with them to maintain that sense of normalcy. The second frame, top center, mindfulness, meditation, and prayer. This too is really important. Like I said, going outside throughout the day, taking off my feet, getting grounded, that is so important for me. It's something that I absolutely need to manage my time and manage my day. But meditation and prayer also, having that time to just be quiet. A lot of people in my neighborhood are out walking. We're meeting more neighbors than we've ever met in the 14 years that we've lived here, or 16 years that we've lived here, because people just need to go outside. They need to be in touch with nature. They need to feel connected to their source or to God or whatever you want to call it. But that's really important to help reduce those symptoms of anxiety and stress. The next thing I want to talk about is, and I'm going to go sort of clockwise. So let's talk about hydration. It's really, really important to keep a healthy brain. Your brain needs oxygen, it needs water, and it needs healthy fats. And if you're not hydrating, what you're going to find is that you're going to have more headaches, you're going to have insomnia, you're going to be confused, you're going to be flustered, you're going to be more forgetful, and that adds to your anxiety. So make sure you stay hydrated. And then rest. It's, when we're feeling really anxious, when we're worried about a lot of things, when you feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, it's really hard to sleep, which is why mindfulness, meditation, prayer, exercise, getting outside, hydration are also important, because without those things, it's more difficult for you to get a good night's sleep. But that good night's sleep is absolutely essential to your overall mental health. So make sure that you're getting a good night's sleep. And if you're struggling with that, here it is. I would suggest getting something like some essential oils, lavender, something like that, that's just calming, soothing, helps you to sleep. You can diffuse it, you can put it on your skin before you go to bed at night, and it will make you drowsy enough and relaxed enough so that perhaps you can get a better night's sleep. And then the last thing I want to share with you, certainly we have more than 6 strategies, but I just want to share this one, is to keep a journal. Like I said before, we're living in unprecedented times, and people are getting sick of hearing the word unprecedented, but there's not another word for it, right? Like, we've never had a pandemic in our lifetime. We have never seen the kind of, well, even with the Rodney King riots, I don't think we've seen the kind of worldwide movement in terms of the fight against racism and injustice as we're seeing right now. This is a different time for us, and we may see this moving forward. But it's something. These are the things we're going to tell our kids about, right? I'm gonna tell my granddaughter how she was born in the middle of a pandemic. We're going to talk to her about that. She's going to have to turn to us for stories to tell her about this part of our history. And so journaling, I think, is more than just processing your thoughts right now. A lot of the times when I sit down to write in my journal, I'm like, so this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, because I want to remember, right? 5 years from now, when I pull that book out, I want to remember what happened, not just in terms of what happened in our house, in our family, but I want to remember what happened within the context of history in the making, right? But beyond that, writing your thoughts is a different process than just thinking them. When you're writing your thoughts down, it processes differently because you have to slow down. You have to pay attention to the words that you're using. And as you're writing, your brain is problem solving. It's a completely different process than just letting stuff roll around in your head. So keeping a journal is a really good way to manage the thoughts that create the anxiety and the stress, because you can problem solve them on paper. And I don't even know how to describe it, to tell you the truth. It's its own form of therapy. if I can put it that way. I've been keeping a journal since I was 12 years old. I'm 52. So I have 40 years of journals collected in my house. And they all have, they all have the year on them. So I'm into my third book of 2020 right now because there's so much going on. But I promise you, I have saved myself hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of therapy by keeping a journal. So I highly recommend that you do that. Not that therapy is bad, all right? If you need it, come see me, but I'm just saying, a journal will save you boatloads of money in that regard. So the last thing I want to offer to you is this ebook where all of these ideas that I've shared with you today are contained in this book that I, funny enough, wrote in January while I was off on medical leave, thinking that I would go back to work and everything would be just like it always was. And I wrote this book and I put it out in January, and I recuperated until March. I went back to work at the end of February and I worked for 2 weeks and closed the doors and came home because of COVID. So even then I had no idea of the radical change that was going to be happening in my own life. So it was a really timely book. But in this book, you'll also find things like my choice matrix, which looks at the different types of choices that we're faced with and what happens when we are looking for short-term gain and we make the wrong choice and all those sorts. So it breaks it down for you: right choice, wrong choice, short-term pain, long-term pain, short-term gain, long-term pain, long-term gain. And it gives you lots of tools that will help you to manage and affect the anxiety of the situation that we're in right now, but also how you can actually create the kind of radical, positive, lasting change that you want. Because again, I'm all about what's your outcome. And so if you have a desired outcome and you're looking to get closer to that outcome, this is something that I'm happy to offer you that will help you do that. So the way you do that is you go to my website. It's anchorsolution.com. You can see it there on the screen. Hopefully the link is fixed. we just found out that the link was broken. I've asked my web developer to fix it for me. However, if you click on the link and it just bounces you back to the home page, please just click on the contact button and send me a message that says that you'd like to get the free ebook, and I'll make sure that you get it. So that's all I have for you. Thank you very much. And I understand the chat. I can see the chat button's been going off there. So
mostly a lot of thank yous so far, but and I feel the same. It's been very good, and I really liked what you said about putting your thoughts on trial. And a lot of entrepreneurs tell me they've experienced imposter syndrome, and I think the framework that you gave, where you think about what's the best thing that can happen, right, and what's the worst thing that can happen. And even your example, the worst thing that could have happened is landlord could have said no, but at least you would have known.
Exactly. Yeah.
As opposed to sitting there scared, right? So sometimes even the bad answer is still better than not knowing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I totally relate to that imposter syndrome. I remember clear as day being I was in Pennsylvania somewhere on the road, and I was on stage and there were about 250 people in the room. And I was mid-sentence and my brain just went, "You don't belong here. You're an idiot. These people can all tell you're an idiot. They're gonna laugh you off the stage." And I was just like, but my mouth had to keep moving, right? Like I had to keep talking because I couldn't just stop in the middle of a seminar. And so I just kind of pushed right through it. But then afterwards I was like, wow, that was weird, And then I had to think about it a little bit, like, okay, so when those moments come, I need reminders. I need to remind myself of who I am. So yeah, it is very much that putting thoughts on trial, like what qualifies me to be here? What's the evidence that says I should be here? What's the evidence that says I don't belong here? Right? And then weigh it out and then be like, okay, no, I'm good. I can keep going.
Would you say that most people or all people or just some people battle with this? Like,
I don't know. I hear about it a lot. I mean,
yeah.
As therapists, even when we sit down for supervision, which is basically just a bunch of us talking about our cases and supporting each other through our practices. When we sit down for peer supervision, we hear that word imposter syndrome all the time, right?
Okay.
I think what people don't realize is that even as therapists, we also have stuff going on in our own lives, and sometimes we don't handle it very well.
Sure.
Right? And so when we're struggling with our own mental health, or we're struggling with our own emotional state, and then we're holding a space for our clients as well, and that's exhausting work, right? So very, very often we don't have anything left for ourselves at the end of the day. Then after a while, it's like, how can I help these people when I can't even help myself, right? We have those kinds of conversations. But that's why we have things like peer support and peer supervision, so that we can work through those things, right? It's
Right.
again, connecting with other people, reaching out, using your journal, all of those tools that I offer to other people are tools that we need to practice for ourselves in order to stay healthy as well.